World War II, Part 2, featuring America, baby. This guy that looks like a bulldog. French ladies getting bad haircuts. D-Day, that day. And it doesn't end well for this guy. Welcome to Part 2, where I tell you how World War II ended. Well, they probably know how it ended. we're not goose-stepping to work wearing lederhosen there. Hey, roll the thing, Toby. Pretty snazzy opening, huh? We were supposed to show that in the last video, but Toby forgot to remind me. I'd cut his pay, but I don't pay him nothing. To bring you up to speed where we were last time, Hitler was blitzkrieging all over the place. He takes over Denmark. He's up there in Norway. And keep in mind, them Norwegians there, they're hardy folk. They're descended from freaking Vikings. You know, like the Zeppelin song, running around with the lava flows, swinging my hammer at the gods in the snow. Those aren't the words, but you know what I'm saying. He also took Poland and what they call the Benelux countries, which sounds like a vacuum cleaner. He took the top half of France, and then the bottom half of France is what they call Vichy France. They named it after like that potato soup, and they were about as useful as a bowl of potato soup, if you know what I'm talking about. So this guy, Philippe Pétain, he's the leader of what they call Vichy France. And this is a real shame, because this guy was like a freaking war hero in World War I, and now his whole thing is he's just kissing Hitler's backside there. So, wait, what's that saying, Toby? You either die a hero or you live long enough to be like a dingleberry or something? I don't know. Meanwhile, this guy, Charles de Gaulle, he's like, F that noise. I'm going to take free France and lead him to victory. And the Vichy France are like, we find you guilty in absentia. That means you're not even here and we find you guilty. And he's like, well, no big deal. I'll just go win the war and then you'll be thanking me. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get a freaking airport named after you. Speaking of kissing kraut butt, up there in Sweden, they're supposed to be neutral, but they're letting the Nazis zip through their country to get to Finland over here and Norway over there. And the rest of Scandinavia, they're still not happy about this. And I don't blame them. If somebody let the Nazis cut through their freaking backyard to get to me, I'd be mad too. Over in Britain, Neville Peace in Our Time Chamberlain is out. Winston Never Surrender Churchill is in. And this is all around good casting. This is like the second season of Parks and Recreation when they brought in Rob Lowe and Adam Scott. Totally changed the dynamic of the show. It gave Leslie Knope and Ann Perkins love interests that would challenge their characters. All around good stuff. Meanwhile, that winter war, Russia should have totally kicked Finland's butt, and they barely won, which is a little upsetting there for Joseph Stalin, Mr. Man of Steel. Now, Hitler wants to bomb Britain and keep them out of the war. He thinks they're going to be like, oh, Mr. Hitler, please stop dropping bombs on us. We'll let you keep all of Europe over there. Oh, but they didn't. There's some tough people there, them pasty white Brits. The people in London, they're tough. They're sleeping in subways to get away from the bombs. They even send their kids out to the country there to keep them safe. And my buddy Paulie says that this is what that book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is about. They're out there in the country there. First of all, why does a lion have a wardrobe? They don't even wear clothes. Flying over London, now you had what's called the RAF, that's the Royal Air Force, and they're shooting down Germans. And it's not just Britons, because they're an empire. They got people, they got Canadians, they got even some people from Poland who are now in the country, and they're good pilots. They have all these colonies in Africa, they got Australia, they got all these people helping them out. And they're flying, they're blowing up Germans. And here's the thing, it's, you know, if you're in an air fight, it's good to have the home field advantage, because if you get shot down and you're lucky enough to live, you live in your country, and then they'll just give you a new plane. If you're German and you get shot down over England there and you're lucky enough to live, yeah, you're a prisoner of war. So that kind of sucked. And the thing about the Germans is, as the war went on, they kept losing their good pilots. So by the end of the war, they had planes, but they didn't have anybody who could fly them. And that's, you know, you kind of need that. Meanwhile, over in Germany, it's not a good time to be a Jew. They did this thing a couple of years ago. It was called Kristallnacht. It means the night of broken glass. They smashed all the windows of the Jewish businesses, and then they ended up taking them over. They put the Jews in ghettos, which is a bad place to live, and then they lock them up. They put them in labor camps, and they're working them to death. Horrible people. And now, I don't want to go into too much detail about the Holocaust, but it's freaking horrible. Watch the movie Schindler's List. You'll bawl your freaking eyes out. I'll tell you, if I ever need a good cry, that's the movie I'm putting on. And here's a fun fact. Hitler was a vegetarian. So apparently he thought eating a cheeseburger was a mortal sin, but genocide is A-OK. This is what you call a moral dichotomy. That's a sciencey way of saying big douchebag. I gotta be honest with you, I don't get why people hate the Jews so much. It's so stupid. We live here, this is called Farmingdale, Long Island, and the next town over is called Massapequa. But around here we jokingly call it Matza Pizza because it's all Jews and Italians and we all get along great. You know what I hate about Massapequa? I'll tell you what I hate about That's where all the famous people are from. You know who's from there? You got Jerry Seinfeld, you got the Baldwin brothers, you got the Stray Cats, there's Supergirl, not the new one, but the one from the 80s. You know who's famous from Farmingdale, Toby? Nobody. No, but not a one. We gotta blow this up. Me and you gotta, well, more me than you. I gotta represent this. They're gonna fly me out to Hollywood there. I'm gonna be walking down the red carpet with Gal Gadot on my arm. That's how it's pronounced too, Gal Gadot. It's gonna be tough on Angela and the kids, but she'll understand. It's freaking Wonder Woman. I'm just kidding, I ain't going nowhere. Meanwhile, in Northern Africa, Mussolini tries to take Egypt and it goes not so good. Or as they say in Italian, not a so gooder. Then Hitler tells him, why don't you go take Greece? And he really screws the pooch on that. He can't do anything, this guy. So instead of Mussolini being like a Roman emperor type of Italian, he's more like the type of Italian who has a big plate of pasta, has some vino, and takes a nap. Or as I like to call them, my people. Then Hitler's over there, he gets Hungary and Romania to be on his side, he attacks Yugoslavia, he goes through Bulgaria to get Greece, and he's got to do this because Mussolini couldn't do it. Imagine this guy's supposed to be your ally, now you're bailing him out. And here's the thing about Hitler and his blitzkrieg. Yeah, that's like what they call shock and awe, that you're coming with a surprise. But I had this buddy, he was into kung fu, with the karate chopping and all that. And he said, when you're in a fight, the other guy gets one free punch because he knows it's a fight before you do. But after that, all bets are off. And that's what's happening now. Hitler doesn't have this element of surprise anymore because now we know it's coming and we're prepared. Things start to not go so well for Hitler now. And over across the pond, as they say in America, a lot of Americans don't want to get involved in this. This is Europe's war, let's not get involved. Some people are holding signs saying, Hitler didn't attack us, let's just leave him alone. But some people are like, we got to get involved, this is bad. You know who was one of the guys who did that? Toby, Dr. Seuss. Do you believe that? He was writing these political cartoons and they look like the Cat in the Hat, but they're saying buy bonds because we got to win this war? Yeah, he was all gung-ho. He was like, one fish, two fish, let's make Hitler deadish. I just made that up, Toby. So now FDR in 1940, he wins the presidency. Here's a little fun fact. This was the third time he won. That's the first time anybody even ran for a third time because nobody did it because George Washington said, let's not do this. Nowadays, it's a rule, but back then, it was just like a gentleman's agreement. And FDR said, hey, I got to run. There's a lot of stuff going on. So FDR, he doesn't want to get involved in the war just yet, but he wants to help Britain. They're the good guys, so he's loading stuff up on boats and he's shipping it over there. But the Germans, they had U-boats, those submarines, and they're sinking boats left and right, and it's terrible. They're called the Wolf Pack. They form these little groups, and they pick off all the boats. It's really bad, but little by little, the Americans and the Brits, we got better radar, better depth charges, stuff like that. So by the end of the war, being on the U-boat was the worst gig in the world. I mean, you're in a tin can underwater, just waiting to be crushed. It was terrible. It was even worse than getting trapped in a conversation with my Aunt Lillian. Oh my God, Toby, that woman you talk to, she'd be like, blah, blah, blah. You're like, I don't even know what she's talking about. If you got stuck next to her at Thanksgiving dinner, you would pray to whatever God you believe in that a death charge would blow you up. It was that bad. She's dead now. Then over in England, you had this guy, Alan Turing, and all the code breakers. So the Germans had this thing called Enigma. It was an Enigma machine. It looked like a little typewriter, but it made codes, and the Brits got one, and they're trying to crack it so they could figure out what's going on. This Alan Turing guy's like a genius. He basically invents the computer, and he's figuring out how to crack this code. And here's what's funny. They noticed all the transmissions from the Germans had like the same couple of letters at the end. They realized they're writing Heil Hitler. They're signing at the end. Imagine that you're writing a code and you give the guys a free way to... So like once they figure out what those letters are, you plug it in and that's how they crack the code. Isn't that crazy? If they weren't stroking Hitler's ego there, they might not have ever cracked the code. And now they know, and then they're with the subs on, the boats on, all this stuff. It was crazy. Here's what's terrible though. After the war, this Alan Turing guy who was a hero, he happens to be a gay fella. And at the time in England, that was illegal. Illegal to be gay. How do you make that illegal? That's like making being left-handed illegal. But anyway, they said you can't be gay, and they chemically castrated him, which means they inject him with this stuff that makes his business shrivel up. That's pretty gross. So if you're like a homophobe, think about, like, our freedom was won by a gay fellow who cracked the code there. So, don't be so homophobic. We'd all be, working for Nazis, which would be terrible. Now is when Hitler does one of the stupidest things imaginable. So remember how he had that deal with Joseph Stalin, the I won't attack you, you won't attack me? Well, he attacks Russia. What an idiot. Of all the dumb things people have ever done, this is probably the dumbest. I mean, I get it. He hated commies and he wanted some of that sweet, sweet living space, but this is like the biggest mistake you could make. And Hitler thought it was going to be like, hey, we'll zip in, we'll zip out. They didn't even bring winter clothes with them to Russia. What an idiot. So he takes a lot of stuff, he even takes Moscow, and then it starts getting cold and they're not prepared for it. But the Russians, they're used to it. Like, remember that episode of The Sopranos there with Christopher and Paulie Walnuts? They had to whack that Russian guy in the Pine Barrens there, and he's like, they're like, brr, it's cold, and he's like, you guys are wimps. It was like that. They were like, freezing, and the Russians like, this is nothing, man. If you want to know the real kick in the taint, this is the same mistake Napoleon made. And Napoleon's the guy Hitler based his whole career on. All the blitzkrieg and stuff, he got that from Napoleon. And then he repeats Napoleon's stupidest mistake. Meanwhile, Japan's over there in Asia, and they're taking over all these islands and stuff. And they're thinking, hey, if America gets involved in this war, we're toast, because they got all these ships and the Navy and all this stuff. They're going to wipe us out. So they figure, hey, why don't we attack them and in one ba-boom, wipe out the whole freaking Navy? So they attack Pearl Harbor, and Pearl Harbor sucked. I mean, not as bad as the Ben Affleck movie, but it sucked. They knocked out a lot of our battleships, but here's the thing, it could have been a lot worse. Unlike that Ben Affleck movie, the movie sucked. Here's the thing, here's why it could have been worse. There was all these oil fields they didn't blow up. They didn't blow up the place where they keep the submarines, and they didn't blow up the repair yards. And more importantly, they didn't blow up any of the aircraft carriers, which we're realizing now these are even more important than battleships. So the U.S. Navy got up and running a lot quicker than they thought they would. And you want to hear another stupid thing that Hitler does now? After Pearl Harbor, he declares war on us. What an idiot. At this point, America's like, oh, let's go to war with Japan. We weren't thinking, oh, the Japanese attacked us. Let's attack Hitler. Instead, he calls war on us, and then we're going off to fight him. Idiot. So the U.S. is in the war now, and the fighting, first place we're fighting is Africa. A lot of people don't know that, North Africa, and at first it's not going so good, but then they promote this guy, Patton. Patton's awesome, and he's whipping the hell out of Rommel, and then Montgomery, who's the British guy, he's getting Rommel from the other side. Pretty soon, the good guys are controlling North Africa, and then they say, hey, why don't we attack up Italy, up the boot? And then the U.S. gives a lot of pilots and bombers and stuff to Britain there and the RAF, and they're flying missions over Germany, and they firebomb Hamburg and Dresden. It's getting pretty nasty there. Meanwhile, over in the Pacific, you had this thing called the Battle of Midway, and it's just like a huge battle with aircraft carriers and planes and dropping torpedoes and torpedo bombs and all this stuff, and we wiped out a lot of the Japanese Navy, and this was like a real turning point. And this is what they wanted to do to us at Pearl Harbor. They wanted to knock us out in one quick ba-boom. Instead, we did it to them, and we didn't do it all sneaky like we did it out there in the middle of the Pacific. You had Halsey, who's a badass admiral, and he's no relation to the much hotter Halsey, and just by coincidence, they both happen to be from Jersey. You got General MacArthur, he's in charge of the army over there in the Pacific, and he likes that Frosty the Snowman pipe, and he's taking over islands again like the Philippines and stuff like that. Then you get Admiral Nimitz, and he's like the big boss of the Pacific Navy over there. And then meanwhile, over in Italy, the U.S. and the Britons, first they go to Sicily, and then they land on the rest of the boot, and they're working their way up there. And the Italians right away, they see the Americans and the Brits, they're like, you know what, we're done. This is stupid. I don't want to be for this Mussolini guy anymore. And they turn on Mussolini, and they end up hanging him. So now the Germans got to come back and get Italy back. This is supposed to be their ally. They're supposed to be taking over Greece and all these countries. Instead, the Germans got to come down and bail them out. So yeah, you didn't choose your allies there too wisely there, Adolf. Then the Allies start planning their invasion of France. They got to go in there and take it over. And if you look at the map, there's a place called Calais, which is right across. It's the closest place to England. So the Germans are thinking that's probably where they're going to go. So the Allies used that to their advantage. They created a ruse. They leaked all this information pretending that Patton's in charge of this army that didn't even exist. And they snuck out stuff to make it look like Patton was going to cross. They would even do clever stuff like take a dead body and put him in like a major's uniform and leave some secret plans in his pocket and leave it in a place where the Germans would find them. They'd be like, oh, look at this, we got secret plans. They're attacking in Calais, but they weren't. Huh? Then comes D-Day, where we storm the beaches of Normandy. And this is like the biggest invasion in the history of the planet. If you saw that movie there with when we got to rescue Matt Damon, not the one when he's on Mars, you know, the Saving Private Ryan, this is it. It's like, oh my God, there's a lot going on here. And it's all over Normandy, and they got paratroopers jumping in. You should watch Band of Brothers, that's awesome. So it's like hundreds of thousands of people now taking over France, and boom, 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 we take over France. We zip into Paris. And then in Paris, you had all these ladies that they were giving aid and comfort to the enemy. You know, they're sleeping with the German guys, so they shaved their heads to say, hey, that's not cool. You shouldn't do that, you know. Meanwhile, in America, we had this thing called the Manhattan Project, which didn't take place in Manhattan. That's part of the deception. So you had all these science nerds figuring out how to make the atomic bomb. And this is the movie Oppenheimer, which everyone was talking about last summer. You know, you should see it. It's long and it's talky, but it's good. And Florence Pugh gets naked, so if that's your thing, you know, watch it. Meanwhile, things are not going so good for Germany and Russia. They're getting their butts whipped. And then Hitler decides to have them attack Stalingrad. That's a city in Russia, and part of it was, it's because it's named after Joseph Stalin. He's like, that'll really get in his craw if I take the city named after him. What an idiot. And you know, I was thinking it would be funny if Joseph Stalin, he should just change the names. He should be like, whatever the best city is, call that Stalingrad, and they could rename Stalingrad as like, you know, Bunghole-opolis. You could be like, hey Adolf, you're the mayor of Bunghole-opolis, good job. But instead, Hitler takes over Stalingrad, and then all these other Russian troops come in and they surround them, and they're trapped in the city with no food, and it's freezing, and all these people start dying, and it was like, what a blunder on Hitler's part. And at this point, Hitler's in his bunker, and nobody wants to tell him the truth. Because here's the thing, he's the kind of guy, like if you tell him something's going wrong, he bites your head off. And if you do that long enough, then people aren't going to tell you when something is going wrong. So they're just like, oh, everything's great, Adolf, that 1,000-year Reich, it's going to happen any minute now. So it's a good lesson. If you're a boss and your subordinates are trying to tell you something, listen to them. Treat them with... Toby, you freaking idiot, I am doing a thing. I don't want to hear about the battery running low. Hitler's freaking out a little bit, thinking, oh, what's going on here? And he's like, let's do one more push and we'll wipe these guys out. And he's like, let's try the same thing that we started at the beginning of the war. We'll go through the Ardennes forest and we'll take over and do all that stuff. This was called the Battle of the Bulge, because if you look at a map, it looks like, you know, like an appendix that's about to burst. And here's a little fun fact. I want to share a little bit about my life with you. My dad, the first date he took my mom on was a movie called The Battle of the Bulge. I kid you not. And here's the thing. My mom thought it was about weight loss. I'm not making this up. But here's the thing. Who takes a woman to a war movie on the first date? I am lucky to be alive. When you meet a woman, you take her out to a movie where on the poster it's like two people about to kiss in the rain. You don't take her to a war movie. Oh, the guy's got no game. And the Battle of Bulge, this is like Hitler's last-ditch effort. And here's a funny story. He sends a telegram to the Americans, and he's like, how about you surrender? And they're like, what? Are you kidding me? So they write back, and this is like the most baller move. They write back one word. They write back, nuts. That is some big D energy. That is awesome. And then he writes back, I'm sorry, guys. I'm not going to be able to make the rest of the war. I got a bad case of ligma. Ligma, you know what I'm talking about, Toby. So Hitler's in his bunker and people are deserting him left and right, and the Russians are practically at his door, and the Americans and Brits are not too far on the other side. So he ends up killing himself. So say what you will about Hitler, at least he killed Hitler. That was the end of the war in Europe, but it's not quite over in Asia yet. Japan, they're taking over all these islands, so America and all the allies, they gotta start island hopping. And I'm not talking about island hopping like when you're in the Caribbean having a pina colada. I mean like everybody's getting shot at. These are some really brutal battles. If you see that picture of Iwo Jima when they're putting up the flag there, and it looks like, oh, they won that. Well, after that, they find out there's all these Japanese people in caves, and this was like nasty. And then Okinawa, the same thing. Like the Japanese people were told, you don't surrender, you fight to the death. And it's really hard to fight people that are willing to die and stuff. So America's getting closer and closer to Japan. And the Japanese start doing this thing called kamikaze, where they load up their planes with explosives and they fly right into their aircraft carriers and stuff and try to blow them up. But meanwhile, over in America, the Manhattan Project paid off and the nerds created this A-bomb, the atomic bomb. And now Truman's president, because FDR, he passed away, and he's got to decide, do you drop this new force of nature on Japan? And he had to think about this. And he's like, well, if I don't do this, we got to land invade, and then millions of people are going to die like that. I mean, well, they're already firebombing the city, so it's not like people aren't dying. So he decides, let's drop the atomic bomb, and hopefully things land sooner. Plus, sends a message to Joseph Stalin, who, we're working with now, but we know that this guy's not like 100% cool, if you know what I'm saying. We dropped 2 atomic bombs, and then finally the emperor's like, all right, I surrender. And that was a big deal, because these guys, the Japanese, think that he's like God's representative on earth, so to get him to surrender was a big deal. And that's how Toby, what the hell is that? Toby, you putting up some other... Toby, these aren't my videos. You're supposed to put my videos. Now, is this one of your nerd friends' channels? Toby, you're an idiot. This is like valuable real estate. I am gonna break you in 2.